Members, it's the appointed time and we have a quorum. I call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee. Today's meeting is scheduled to end at 6:30 p.m. If necessary, I will at most extend the meeting by 15 minutes. I'd like to remind members that if you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest regarding the discussion item today, please, in accordance with the requirements under 83 and 84 of the Rules of Procedures, declare the nature of such interests before you speak. Please also bear in mind Rule 84 of the ROP concerning voting in case of direct pecuniary interests. Item 1, FCR 2026-27-18. This item seeks members' approval on the recommendation made by the Public Works Subcommittee on the 3rd of June concerning the proposal in PWSC 2026-27 number 4. Upgrading of 9SG to Category A at an estimated cost of $399.7 million in money of the day prices for the provision of welfare facilities in public housing development at Kowloon Road Phase 2. As the PWSC does not recommend the paper for further discussion and that no joint request from at least 3 members was received for further discussion of the item, this committee will, in accordance with paragraph 3A of the FC procedures, follow the recommendation of the PWSC and will not discuss this paper further. I now put item FCR 2026-27-18 to vote. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the majority of the members who voted are in favor of this proposal. I declare this item approved. Item 2, FCR 2026-27-19. This item seeks members' approval on the recommendation made by the PWSC on the 3rd of June concerning the proposal in PWSC 2026-27-5, upgrading of 203GK to Category A at an estimated cost of $2,490 million in money of the day prices for the joint user complex at Carpenter Road, Kowloon City. Like the previous item, the FC will follow the recommendation of the PWSC and will not discuss this paper further. I now put FCR 2026-27-19 to vote. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the majority of the members who voted are in favor of this proposal. I declare this item approved. Item 3, FCR 2026-27-20. This item seeks members' approval on the recommendation made by the PWSC on the 5th of June concerning the proposal in PWSC 2026-27 number 6, upgrading of 202TB to Category A at an estimated cost of $188.4 million in money of the day prices for the lift and pedestrian walkway system between Lai King Hill Road and Lai Chou Road, Kwai Chung. Like the previous items, the FC will follow the recommendation of the PWSC and will not discuss this paper further. I now put FCR 2026-27-20 to vote. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the majority of the members who voted are in favor of this proposal. I declare this item approved. Item 4, FCR 2026-27-21. This item seeks members' approval on the recommendation made by the PWSC on the 5th of June concerning the proposal in PWSC 2026-27 number 7, upgrading of 888TH to Category A at an estimated cost of $1,549.9 million in money of the day prices for the widening of Yuen Long Highway section between Lam Tay and Tong Yen Sen Chun. Like the previous items, the FC will follow the recommendation of the PWSC and will not discuss this paper further. I now put FCR 2026-27-21 to vote. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the majority of the members who voted are in favor of this proposal. I declare this item approved. Item 5, FCR 2026-27-22. This item seeks members' approval on the recommendation made by the PWSC on the 5th of June concerning the proposal in PWSC 2026-27 number 8, upgrading of 86 Ti to Category A at an estimated cost of $1,928.8 million in money of the day prices for the Seoul Kwun Po North-South Link Road, as well as the relevant works. Like the previous items, the FC will follow the recommendation of the PWSC and will not discuss this paper further. I now put FCR 2026-27-22 to vote. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the majority of the members who voted are in favor of this proposal. I declare this item approved. Item 6, FCR 2026-27, number 23. This item seeks members' approval on the following. A. With effect from the 1st of April 2026, an increase of 2% in the dollar value of the pay points in the upper, middle, and lower salary bands and the Directorate of the Civil Service pay scales arising from the 2026-27 Civil Service pay adjustment. B. Corresponding adjustments to the provisions for aided schools. C. Corresponding adjustments to the provisions for the ICAC. And D. Corresponding adjustments to the provisions for subvented bodies. On the 16th of June, the Civil Service Bureau consulted the Panel on Public Service on the proposal. Members who'd like to raise questions, please press the Request to Speak button. I'd like to remind members that after the Q&A session, I will immediately put this item to vote. Please pay attention to the progress of the meeting and return to this meeting room for the vote. To address members' questions, we have the following government officials in attendance. Mrs. Ingrid Yeung, Secretary for the Civil Service, Ms. Shirley Lam, Permanent Secretary for the Civil Service, Mr. Alex Chen, Deputy Secretary for the Civil Service, and Ms. Jean Fong, Principal Assistant Secretary for the Civil Service. Now I'll ask Chairman of the Panel on Public Service to report to us on the meeting. Thank you. At this meeting on the 16th of June this year, the Panel on Public Service discussed the Civil Service pay adjustment proposal for the 2026-27 fiscal year put forward by the administration. Members supported the administration's submission of the pay adjustment proposal to the FC as soon as possible. However, a number of members said the proposed 2% pay increase for civil servants across the board is disappointing. They are of the view that while most of the 6 key factors look positive, the proposal still deviates from the net PTI's pay trend indicators. This widens the pay gap between civil servants and the private sector. Given last year's across-the-board civil service pay freeze, the pay adjustment lags behind the cumulative inflation of the past 2 years, affecting civil servants' standard of living and purchasing power. Members expressed understanding of the government's need to manage public finances prudently, but stressed that the administration must factor in the appeal of civil service posts to ensure talent retention. If Hong Kong's economy continues to perform well in the future, the administration should offer a reasonable pay rise to civil servants to keep up morale and show appreciation for their efforts. The administration responded to the questions and concerns raised by members during the meeting. That's all for my report. 10 members have asked to speak. I'm going to read out the lineup. Mr. Aaron Bok, Mr. Lam Chun Sing, Mr. Kitson Yang, Mr. Kenneth Fok, Mr. Lam Wai Kong, Mr. Kingsley Wong, Mr. Chen Cho Kwong, Mr. Chao Xiu Chung, Mr. Adrian Ho, Professor Priscilla Leung. I'll give each member 4 minutes, including questions and answers. Mr. Aaron Bok, please. Thank you. Over the past few years, the civil service faced a reduction of establishment of 10,000 for 2 years. In 2024, a drop of 7%, that is $45 billion. To enhance speed, a number of measures were proposed. For example, the waiting time for public rental housing was reduced to 3 years. The government was bold to addressed the SDU problems and rolled out the basic housing regime. The works project teams also helped roll out the Fanling bypass as well as the central Kowloon bypass, and also the northern metropolis is underway. In 2025, in terms of government efficiency, Hong Kong ranks second in the world as well as the first in Asia in terms of its world competitiveness. However, civil servants are like air. It's indispensable, but it's hardly noticeable by everyone. When you wait in the queue in other places, you will start appreciating civil servants in Hong Kong. When things happen, however, people have strong reactions. Members of the public are of the view that the Wangfuk Court fire happened because of a lack of regulation. I think that the civil service should not take up the entire responsibility because this is not fair to them. Since 2022, civil servants have experienced 3 pay freezes, and their pay lags behind cumulative inflation. The government has had difficulties in recruiting civil servants. The lagging behind of pay rise will affect public service quality. The government has been emphasizing the importance of retaining and attracting talent. However, civil servants are of the view that they have not been treated fairly. In the private sector, they often make reference to civil service pay to determine their own pay rises. The low civil service pay rise will not only affect civil service morale, but affect the income level of all employees in Hong Kong. So this is not just about the 170,000 civil servants. It's about the 330,000 or so people, including teachers who work in subvented as well as public organizations, including their family members. We're talking about 1 million people. So a low civil service pay rise will, at the end, hurt the economy. Treating civil servants fairly is a basic investment for the government. Paragraph 19 of the paper says that 10,000 posts in the civil service will be reduced, and there is a 10% vacancy. And civil servants has displayed strong dedication and commitment. While there is strong economic growth and that civil servants have been dedicated, how come the civil pay rise cannot meet the 2.64% for the middle salary band? And the secretary said $2.2 billion is not very significant compared to the fiscal reserve we have. Then how come you do not increase the pay rise further? Secretary, I have family members who work as civil servants, and they will directly be affected by the pay offers this year. Mr. Aaron Bok raised the same views I have. I think that the majority of civil servants are dedicated and they work hard. Over the past few years, the government has been adopting a result-oriented approach, and we have put in full dedication in terms of adopting innovative technologies and approaches. And we made a lot of breakthroughs and overcome a lot of hurdles. The CE in Council, when deciding on the pay offers, have taken all these into consideration. However, at the same time, they also took into account that the government has to manage finances prudently. The fiscal reserve we have is enough for us to sustain Hong Kong for 10 months. And this is quite a gap compared to the fiscal reserve we used to have. So we have to prudently cope with geopolitical tensions which might affect people's livelihood. The war in the Middle East may affect the expenditure of the Hong Kong government, and this serves a lesson for the government. That is, we might have to have extra expenditure unexpectedly. So we have taken into consideration different factors. It's not that the government is trying to lower the pay rise for civil servants, and it is not that we do not attach importance to talent retention or talent attraction. According to our recruitment exercises, we have still been able to attract a lot of talent. I believe civil service posts still have their attractiveness. Over the past 2 years, the civil service pay rise were not aligned with the PTI, the net PTIs. However, civil service posts, they offer stability, and these are part of the uniqueness of jobs in the civil service. Members, please do not ask questions as long as 3 minutes. Otherwise, there wouldn't be enough time for the administration to reply to your questions. Mr. Lim Chun Sing. I understand that the pay trend is one of the 6 key factors that the CE in Council takes into consideration. If we do not follow the indicators, I'm worried that it is meaningless to keep conducting this kind of pay trend surveys. How come we do not stick to the 2.64% of the net PTIs? That would ensure civil service morale, and that would help us catch up with inflation from last year, and that is also closer to the demands of the staff side. This year, the economic growth has been stable. If the pay rise increases from 2 to 2.64%, what will be the government expenditure? Has the government thought about this? Would it be unaffordable for the government to follow the net PTIs? Also, the Secretary as well as others have said that when deciding on the civil service pay rise, the government has to take into account public perception. Well, this is inevitable. However, I am worried that if we pay too much attention to the public perception, would that cause disputes or conflicts? That is, when the civil service gets a lower pay rise, the public will be happier. In terms of government efficiency, we are ranked the 2nd in terms of our world competitiveness, and this shows the quality and efficiency of civil servants in Hong Kong. And how are these reflected in the pay rise of civil servants?
Secretary. Thank you, Chair. If we follow the net pay trend indicator for the middle salary band, 2.64%, compared with our proposal 2%, the difference is approximately $2 billion. Mr. Box said it's not a lot, but then we need to make sure we are prudent because we are using public money. To strike a balance, 2% is an appropriate figure. $2 billion or $2.5 billion or $2.8 billion more. I mean, people can propose different figures, but it's always about striking a balance. As for the second question, as I said before on different occasions, including at panel meetings, the Chief Executive in Council would have a mind public impression. We do not only look at isolated or single incidents. We do understand that in certain incidents where some public servants did not do too well, it should not affect the general civil service because there is another way to handle those who have not performed well. But civil service pay adjustment should also have regard to the different factors. For example, the economic circumstances, inflation, geopolitical challenges, or potential unanticipated circumstances. We do see a recovery of public finance, but a lot of that actually comes from clawback of reserves. And the Chief Executive and Council would consider this, and we believe this is necessary. Thank you, Mr. Yang Wing-kit. Thank you. I understand where the government came from, and I do support the administration's proposal. Many members questioned why we did not follow the mechanism. I think the government's approach is right to consider the 6 relevant factors. As of March 2027, we have $687.6 in reserves. We have thought about different proposals over the past year. And if we are to already pay civil servants and related entities $6 billion, it's not a lot. It's a lot, and there's not much left in our reserves. Some other members asked a question which I want to follow up on. With the pay adjustment being proposed at 2%, what is the administration's estimation of how many civil servants will leave as a result? If a lot of civil servants are going to quit, I think we need to really review the situation. I want to say for civil servants and electrical members, it's not just about seeking pay increases. There are other factors in mind because we are serving the public. So that's my question. Thank you. Mrs. Ingrid Young, Secretary. We actually have a very low resignation rate for civil servants who are not leaving because of retirement. It's just 1.38%. Last year's pay freeze decision was well understood by civil servants. Most civil servants actually have in mind the profession being a lifelong profession, and we do think civil servants gradually perform better as they accumulate experience, so they want to stay here for long. And we can see in the past 10 years up to 2025, the cumulative increase in pay is still higher than the cumulative inflation. If people treat civil service as a lifelong profession, they should not worry because except for specific years, the pay of the civil service is more than enough to cover what they need to purchase, retaining the purchasing power. Mr. Kenneth Falk, thank you. On behalf of the G19, I support the administration's proposal, including the pay adjustment proposed by the Civil Service Bureau. I will not go into the specific justifications here, but I think in different places in the world we have different things going on. The administration's proposal is pragmatic and practices prudent public finance. We do support this approach. I note that with this adjustment, it would cost the government $6.063 billion. 45% is for civil service pay adjustment specifically, and the other half, more than half of it, is for other subvented bodies and ICAC and aided schools. It seems that we have the latter growing in proportion compared to past years. Now it's more than half of the proportion. Have we looked at for subvented bodies, what is the situation regarding pay adjustment and whether we are practicing what we're doing in the civil service with subvented bodies. Secretary, thank you. For aided schools, ICAC, and subvented bodies, basically, aided schools and ICAC receive the same levels of pay as civil servants, just like the teachers in public schools. Whereas for subvented bodies, they have formulae, and the formulae include a factor of civil service pay adjustment. So with civil service pay adjustment, their provisions will increase by a certain ratio. I do understand many subvented bodies will adopt the percentage of civil service pay adjustment in adjusting pay of their staff members, but it is not definite from what I know. For subvented bodies, say social welfare organizations, in the past 2 years, as we have a not so good fiscal position, there is a decrease of the provisions. Universities also saw adjustments to their funding. So the general provisions have seen adjustments. Today, the adjustments are specific to the factor on civil service pay adjustment. So we have already made adjustments to the provisions. Mr. Kenfall, any follow-up? I would just like to declare that I am a chairman for an organization that is a subvented body in the cultural industry. All right, thank you. Mr. Lam Wai Kong. Thank you, Chair. I'm very disappointed about the administration's proposal. Many staff side claims are up to 4%, and right now we are just doing a pay adjustment of 2%. It's not up to what is claimed by staff side, and we really need to boost morale with the decline in manpower and more initiatives going on. We have 6 factors to be considered by the pay trend survey, and we are not following the pay trend indicators. As Mr. Lam Chun Sing said, should we have a comprehensive review of the 6 factors and whether we need the pay trend indicators at all? If they are not needed, will there be other factors we should consider for civil service pay adjustment? Regarding the assessment for the 6 factors, perhaps we should also look at the weightings of the different factors. We had some members talk about in the end the government would consider public impression. Can you elaborate on this? After all, some civil servants don't really understand the rationale, and it seems that the administration is just deciding on a unified percentage at will. Can you perhaps elaborate on the justifications? Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Chair. We do think it is necessary to conduct a pay trend survey, and it is meaningful because it provides to the Chief Executive in Council reliable data on pay in private sector organizations. The pay trend surveys are undertaken under a very strict approach. We have regard to the distribution of sectors, and that is generally in line with the distribution of working population in different sectors. We do have specific requirements for the sizes of employers. They need to be of a certain scale. They should have a pay management system. They need to be representative in their specific sectors. the indicators derived are very reliable. If we do not conduct the survey, it will not allow us to have reference to private sector pay data. You may have observed in the past 1 or 2 years we have deviated by the pay trend indicators, but then there is a need for us to refer to the private sector data by conducting relevant survey. As for the weightings of the 6 factors, it is hard to derive a formula to determine the weighting of the factors specifically. It really depends on the circumstances at the time. We also need to have regard to the fact that the government is handling public money, and if we are not doing too well in terms of the economy, we need to make sure we mitigate specific risks by earmarking funds for potential expenditure. Thank you. Mr. Kingsley Wong. Thank you, Chair. I would like to recognize the efforts of the Civil Service Bureau. They have reflected accurately the South Side's sentiment that they are very disappointed. I note for the 6 factors, there is one about the government's fiscal position. For the other 5 factors, they should support an increase in civil service pay. We had a pay freeze before, and for the CPI, in the 2 years where there is a pay freeze, there was not much in economic growth. In 2024, it's 2.5. In 2025, it's 3.2%. And for wage growth, there are positive percentages in the 2 years, more than 2%. So in 2026, we expect to have an economic growth of 2.5 to 3.5%. That is quite good. Is it possible for us to catch up with this cumulative increase when the government's fiscal position improves? I have another question. We should share the fruits of economic growth with citizens. For the 6 factors, managing the government's fiscal position is senior civil servants' work. For those on lower levels, they have expectations for wage growth just like general workers. So when we consider pay increase for civil servants, can we make sure to have regard to not only economic growth but also general wage growth in the labor market, so that civil servants as workers can also reap the fruits of economic growth and receive a similar level of pay adjustment just like workers in the labor market, because the increase should be 6.6%. Thank you.
Secretary. The fiscal position of the government is, of course, a major consideration. Well, Mr. Kingsley Wong made an assumption. He asked what would happen if the economy improved. Well, the CE Council made a decision based on the situation every year. The CE Council in general agrees that the civil service pay level should have a certain level of attractiveness in order to retain talent as well as to attract those who are competent. We agree that if there is significant economic growth, civil servants should be able to enjoy the fruit of it. This is because civil servants have worked hard for that. And the CE Council take into account all these factors. Moving forward, if the situation is good, will the pay rise be able to keep up with the cumulative inflation? growth, well, the civil service pay rise outpaced the cumulative inflation. So in future, if our economy improves, we will definitely offer a reasonable pay rise to boost civil service morale as well as to retain talent. Mr. Chen Chou-kwong, I declare that my family has a civil service background. My view is this. From the employer perspective, of course, they do not want to increase the pay of their employees, but from the employees' perspective, they want as much pay rise as possible. So there is a division. Therefore, years ago, the government suggested that there should be a salary survey, and once every 6 years, there should be a civil service pay level survey. This is a very good mechanism, which has been in place for a long time. The 2% proposed pay rise is disappointing. Well, I think that it's better to have a pay rise than not. However, I have the following questions. This proposal deviates from the net PTIs. I have been in the relevant committees for years, since 2008. I can tell you as a previous member that this mechanism is very reliable and stringent, but this time around the proposal deviates from the net PTIs. Also, the government is proposing an across-the-board pay rise, and this is not fair. Third, this proposal disregards civil service morale. And fourth, since you are deviating from the net PTIs, you are creating a big gap between the civil service pay and that of the private sector. Fifth, the net PTIs generated are on the low side. This is because the PCIs have been deducted. Originally, the PTI stands at 6%, but after the deduction, it is, for example, 4%. And the general public may not be aware of that. So I think it's necessary for us to explain this to the public. Lastly, I think we have such a good mechanism in place. How come we do not stick to this mechanism? And it is not the civil servants or the employees who damage this mechanism. This is because employees are passive. It is up to the government to make a decision. The 6 key factors are very abstract. Civil service morale and Hong Kong economic condition are part of the 6 key factors. No matter how much we abide by the 6 factors, at the end of the day, it's up to the government that makes a decision. I hope the government can stringently adhere to the established mechanism. Secretary, do you have any reply? Yes. Mr. Chen talked about the civil service pay level survey as well as the starting salaries survey. For the pay level survey, we started this one every 6 years mechanism in 2019. Because of COVID, things got delayed. After we have finished the first phase after COVID, we realized that there was fluctuation in the job market. This is because we had to compare various civil service posts with various posts in the private sector, mostly civilian posts. There was fluctuation in the labor market, and therefore such a comparison was not very meaningful. It was also hard for us to make a comparison because in some sectors there was a very acute manpower shortage and foreign labor had to be brought in. Therefore, we decided to stop the pay level survey that year. When will we activate the survey again? Well, we will look at the actual circumstances. We see that there are still many changes in the labor market. For example, because of AI, many frontline jobs are disappearing, and the nature of jobs are also shifting. So this is not a very good timing for us to make such a comparison. Even within the civil service, there are changes to many posts and jobs. So it's hard for us to make such a comparison. We will wait until the labor market stabilizes to re-trigger this pay level survey. Next, Mr. Chao Xiu-chung. Every year, civil servants ask for a pay rise, and I think these are all reasonable demands. It is not like what some people said, that civil servants are greedy and are hard to be satisfied and are not committed. This is not true. Over the past 6 years, civil servants have experienced 3 civil service pay freezes, and 2 of the years the PTIs were not followed, and civil servants did not complain much. Like last year, the government didn't even do the pay trend survey and directly imposed a pay freeze. So how come this year civil servants made so many complaints? I think the government must face up the problem squarely. The CE in Council is supposed to take into account 6 key factors. All these factors look very positive this year. Therefore, civil servants had high expectations on the pay rise. Therefore, on behalf of civil servants, I'd like to say that I am very disappointed with the proposed 2% pay rise by the government. Like many members said, according to the World Competitiveness Yearbook, the latest figures showed that in terms of government efficiency, our government ranked 2nd in the world and 1st in Asia. Some said it is because we have a very good legal system and very good business environment. Well, I don't completely agree. Yes, we have a good legal system and a good tax regime. However, on top of that, we need an outstanding civil service team in order to implement all the initiatives. I believe the Secretary would agree with me. I looked at the Facebook page of the Secretary, and she said we were ranked top of the world because of the high efficiency of our civil servants, and the Chief Executive said the same. So my question is, the proposed 2% increase fails to catch up with the cumulative inflation, and it is not aligned with the net PTIs. Also, with last year's pay freeze, how does the Secretary view the commitment and dedicated efforts of the civil servants? Second, civil servants' demand is very clear. And the Secretary, when announcing the proposed pay rise, said the 2% increase aims at maintaining civil service morale. Does the Secretary think that the 2% pay rise can help boost civil service morale? Are you making an assumption that civil servants should appreciate the pay rise, no matter how much the pay rise is? Well, I don't think civil servants would feel good about what the Secretary said. Secretary, on civil servants' performance, well, the SAR government acknowledges the performance. According to the World Competitiveness Yearbook, we are ranked the 2nd for the 2nd year in a row in terms of government efficiency. And thanks to our civil servants, we were able to achieve that. In terms of maintaining civil service morale, we think that the proposed pay rise means that we recognize civil servants' work. However, because of other constraints and limitations, after making a balance, we have made this decision. I hope that people would not have the misunderstanding that a higher pay rise would mean that there is a higher level of recognition from the government on civil servants' work. After Ms. Nixie Lam speaks, I will put the item to vote. Well, Dr. Junius Ho is also asking to speak. Well, let's move on. Mr. Adrian Ho. Mr. Chao Shu Chong asked the question I wanted to ask, so yes, thank you. Now 3 members are waiting to speak. I will put this item to vote after Dr. Junius Ho speaks. Members, please return to the chamber as soon as possible. Professor Priscilla Leung, I speak in support of the government's decision. I agree to the 2% pay rise. This is a result with a balance struck. Well, I think that our economy has just recovered. Some asked whether the government should issue bonds worth $900 billion. Well, I support bond issuance. We've got many different suggestions. And I think I agree to the 2% pay rise. Some government departments work ceaselessly. And I think the community could see that. However, are our civil servants capable of coping with all the crises, and that's why they complain about the 2% pay rise? Well, I think civil servants must ride out the tough times with the public. Some members of the public are very critical against civil servants. In this tough time, I think this is the right timing or the best timing for civil servants to display their sense of mission. If civil servants can do that, I think next year there should be a higher pay rise for them. I teach at the City University, and I remember in 2003, we proposed a pay freeze ourselves. This is because times were very difficult back then. So I think during tough times, we should show to the public that we will work hard to cope with the challenges. And I think the civil servants will need time to make improvement. Some members asked whether civil servants would quit with such a low pay rise. I don't think that's the case. There are 4 to 5 civil servants in my family, and they all have a sense of mission. They are dedicated to serving the public. They don't decide whether to quit based on the annual pay rise. This is because working in the civil service is a very good job. I hope we can look at this more positively. In face of all the problems, the government has made a decision. I don't think boosting the pay rise is the only way to enhance civil service morale. I remember that after two pay freezes, the government proposed a more significant pay rise, and civil servants were very happy about that.
Any response from the Secretary? None. Thank you. Ms. Nixie Lam. Thank you, Chair. I heard many other members express different views. I speak on behalf of the DAB as I'm a representative for the DAB on civil service affairs. I express support for the proposal. It really depends on where your stance lies. Some of those representing the workers will complain that 2% is not enough. Some other citizens, such as those expressing their views online, ask why there was a pay raise, and that is the reality. Even today, we have received criticisms. To be fair, the economy is not doing too well. It is not stable enough. We are giving a 2% pay raise, and that would already mean $6 billion. And if it is to be 4% or above, that would be double the figure. Considering the fiscal position of the government with so many projects going on, is that enough? We really need to consider this perspective. And 3.324 billion out of the $6 billion is for adjustments for subvented bodies. We actually discussed with the Secretary in the last term to see how we can have representatives from subvented bodies come to the LegCo to explain their use of the funds. So I want to ask the Bureau what system they have in mind with the feedback loop relating to adjustments and provisions for subvented bodies. For pay adjustments made to subvented bodies, I believe that is not a small sum either, considering the sum for the civil service. So I hope the Secretary would have regard to the situation. Thank you. Secretary, as I said earlier, for teachers in aided schools and the staff members of ICAC, their pay is directly linked to civil service pay. They will see the same level of adjustment. For staff members of subvented bodies, they are subject to a formula that include a factor on civil service pay adjustment. So there will be change to the factor with civil service pay adjustment. With this adjustment, the subvented bodies may not necessarily pay the increase in the provisions out to their staff members. I do understand a lot of them do, but then it's up to the subvented bodies to see how they make use of their funds. Thank you. Dr. Janice Ho. Thank you, Chair. I'm probably the only one who has great reservations about the proposal. I think 2% is reasonable. I think even 2.6% would be reasonable, but it's not just about the percentage. If you have an effective and efficient civil service, I don't mind giving them a 10% pay raise. In the mainland, they have merit pay for the civil service. I think those who should be paid should be paid. I think deviating from the indicators does not make sense. It's undermining the mechanism. I agree with what Mr. Chao Su-chung and other members said. We should follow the mechanism. The administration said they are considering public impression. So I think what matters is why there is a public impression, why there is reservations on the part of the public about civil service pay increase. We need to also consider the fiscal position of the government. According to the paper, for the surpluses of the 2025 and 2026 and 2026-2027 fiscal years, much of the funds came from clawback from the exchange fund or other reserves. That means we're not doing too well in terms of fiscal position. At least it's not stable. We are heavily reliant on stamp duty revenue. We have a narrow tax base. We do not have good land sale revenue. It's all about finances, and we need to budget for things. We have our reserves decline from $1.1 trillion to $600 billion now. So citizens do note that we have very few sources of government revenue. In the long term, we of course need to develop new sources of revenue, but we should also consider saving costs by trimming the civil service. Think about it. Within the establishment, we have 180,000 civil servants, but outside the civil service, we have the hospital authority, teachers. The total can be 100,000. We basically have each civil servant in Hong Kong serving 38 to 41 citizens. And if we include the staff members of subvented bodies, it would mean a civil servant is serving only 20-odd citizens. I think 2% is not enough. But with such a large civil service, adding even 1% to the 2% is too much. If you trim the civil service to a reasonable level, you can give a pay raise of 10%. I think most civil servants do well. As Mr. Aaron Buck said, the civil service has been working hard to resolve different issues. But then I think the civil service really needs to be trimmed. Otherwise, even an additional % of pay raise would be a significant sum for the government. I don't need a response. All right, thank you. Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you, Chair. Regarding the pay adjustment, I have received many inquiries from civil service organizations, and they have expressed their views to me. They thought the administration should make use of the standing mechanism for pay adjustment. And in the past 4 to 5 years, the administration's approach had disappointed many civil service organizations and civil servants specifically. Most of the civil servants who have expressed their views said why you didn't follow the mechanism when there was a mechanism in place, and last year the survey was not even done and there was a pay freeze. So we basically don't know what the administration is doing, whether you're going to follow the mechanism or not, or whether you're going to have regard to the economic circumstances or not. I think there should be better communication with civil servants. If you have a decision in mind or if you have difficulties, you can talk to civil service unions about this in advance. If people are disappointed rather than agree with your proposal, I think you should really pay attention to what the issue is. The government is not a profitable entity, but I think for civil servants who have been working hard and perform well, you really want to boost their morale so as to really help with economic growth as well, benefiting everyone in the end. Civil service pay adjustment affects also the 3-odd million workers in the labor force, including those working in the private sector, because their pay is also somewhat affected by civil service pay. I think the administration shouldn't say that they are having regard to public impression when making relevant decision. We should follow the mechanism and make sure civil service pay can catch up with inflation and meet their livelihood needs. We shouldn't try to catch up in later years. We should just follow the mechanism. Do you need a response? No need. All right, last member to speak, Ms. Carmen Khan. Thank you, Chair. I was not going to ask questions, but having heard what others said and the discussion earlier, I think the Secretary should clarify the fact that the 6 factors, within the 6 factors, one of them is the net pay trend indicators derived from the pay trend survey. So you have derived the indicators from the survey, but you did not follow the findings. I think there's a need for the administration to explain that they only need to have reference to the factors, they did not necessarily have to follow the indicators, but they should specify the weightings of the different factors. Or is it the case that you have no weights assigned to the factors at all, that after you have completed a pay trend survey, you would just consider all 6 factors in a consolidated manner? I think we should make clear of that before voting. All right, I'll draw the line after Mr. Ewing Peng has spoken. Thank you. Secretary. I think Ms. Khan's question is very clear, and I would also like to take the time to respond to Mr. Dennis Leung's points made. For the mechanism, it does not mean we necessarily need to follow the pay trend indicators. Pay trend indicators is just one of the 6 factors, and the practice is to consider all 6 factors. So we are following the mechanism. As Ms. Khan said, and as I said earlier when responding to another member's questions, we do not have specific percentages or weights assigned to the factors. We need to have regard to the specific circumstances in a particular year. Say last year there was a pay freeze without the conducting of the survey altogether. It was because there were special circumstances. We have a deficit of over $100 billion, and it's not just civil servants. Other electrical members, for example, also had a pay freeze. With the circumstances being so dire, everyone had to work together to tide over the difficulties. Every year we have different circumstances, so we can't really be scientific with weightings of factors. Thank you.
Mr. Wu Yingpeng. Thank you, Chairman. I, in general, support the proposed pay rise. My question is, how will the government cope with the economic challenges? After the pay rise, how can we, on one hand, increase revenue and achieve cost saving, and at the same time, enhance civil service morale, and how will you assess civil servants' performance? Secretary. We keep in close communication with our civil servants, and we also keep communicating with the civil service unions as well as the 4 central consultative councils. We ask our directorate officers as well as department heads to talk to the civil service unions. We emphasize rewards and punishment. For those who perform well, they will be rewarded and recognized. I think one way to boost civil service morale is to have the recognition from members of the public as well as members of this council. I hope that when civil servants perform well, you can offer your recognition to them. And we will continue to work to tell good stories of civil servants. And we will be very honest when we present these stories. For those who do not perform well, we have established mechanisms to deal with those civil servants. For example, we have recently tightened our assessment and appraisal mechanism. This way, civil servants who are dedicated will work more proactively, and for those who display substandard performance will have a chance to make improvement. I believe that way, civil service morale will be enhanced. Any follow-up questions? No. I now put FCR 2026-27, number 23 to vote. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the majority of members who voted are in favor of the proposal. I declare this item approved. Item 7, FCR 2026-27, number 24. This item seeks members' approval on a commitment of $4,600 million as trading fund capital appropriated from the Capital Investment Fund to the Post Office Trading Fund to finance the refurbishment of the Airmail Centre of Hong Kong Post and support the continuous operation of Hong Kong Post over the next 3 years. On the 2nd of June, the CEDB consulted the relevant panel. Members who'd like to raise questions, please press the Request to Speak button. I'd like to remind members that after the Q&A session, I will immediately put this item to vote. Please pay attention to the progress of the meeting and return to this meeting room for the vote. To address members' questions, we have the following government officials in attendance. Mr. Algernon Yao, Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, Ms. Winsome Au, Deputy Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, Ms. Leonia Tai, Postmaster General, and Ms. Helen Chen, Deputy Postmaster General. I now ask Dr. Eric Yim of the Panel on Economic Development to give us a report. Thank you. The Panel on Economic Development discussed this funding proposal at this meeting on the 2nd of June this year. Members agreed that Hong Kong Post needs to fulfill the requirements of the Universal Postal Union by delivering public postal services at reasonable prices to fulfill its responsibility of providing universal postal services. Members therefore supported in principle the proposal to inject funds into the Post Office Trading Fund to refurbish the Airmail Centre of Hong Kong Post and ensure the continuous operation of Hong Kong Post. However, members also expressed concerns about the financial sustainability of the trading fund in light of the shrinking global demand for traditional postal services. They stressed that the administration should conduct a comprehensive review of Hong Kong Post's long-term positioning, particularly whether it should continue to operate under the trading fund, and report back to the panel as soon as possible. The panel also asked the administration to provide detailed information on the trading fund's financial position in the paper to be submitted to the Finance Committee. The information should include past profit and loss statements, projected revenue and expenditure for the next 3 to 5 years, as well as cash flow analysis. That's all for my report. Thank you. 26 members have asked to speak. I'm going to read out the names of the first 15 members. Mr. Kenneth Fok, Mr. Jonathan Leung, Mr. Len Wai Kong, Professor William Wong, Mr. Bill Tang, Mr. Holden Chow, Mr. Jonathan Lamport, Dr. Johnny Mr. Rock Chen, Mr. Dennis Leung, Mr. Ronick Chen, Ms. Vivian Kong, Mr. Adrian Ho, Dr. Webster Mr. Duncan Chu. I'll give each member 4 minutes, including questions and answers. Mr. Kenneth Fok, please. Thank you. I've read the paper and I have many struggles in mind. I'm wondering what the situation is. Allow me to be frank. It is like a son talking to his father that he will work hard, but he wants continuous financial support from his father, but he guarantees that 3 years later he will become self-reliant. And from the father's perspective, he sees that the son is not trying to find a job and stays home all day long. This is the feeling I have by reading this paper. I really don't see the financial viability of the trading fund. I see that the government has done a lot, but every year the situation gets worse. Before COVID, the loss was about $200 to $300 million. During COVID, because of fewer activities, the loss was narrowed. However, after COVID, the loss became bigger again. I'm concerned about whether the fund could support the continuous operation of Hong Kong Post over the next 3 years. I don't see how the proposal can improve the operation of Hong Kong Post. It's just keeping Hong Kong Post alive. I have 3 questions. First, will we go back to the original objective of the trading fund? The policy objective is that Hong Kong Post should run on a self-financing basis, but Hong Kong Post fails. So, since this does not work, will we find another solution? As mentioned at the panel, I asked if Hong Kong Post should become a government department so that the government does not need to keep injecting funds to keep it alive. The second question is about the refurbishment. I agree that we should not build something new but refurbish what we have. $700 million were spent to build the decanting building. There will be refurbishment and decantation. Does that mean the total size of the new building or new facility will be much bigger? Lastly, this is a funding proposal for the next 3 years. I see that the government will conduct a review according to the paper. Will the government tell us when it will conduct the review? Will the review only come 3 years later? The government is asking for $4,600 million, and if the financial situation remains the same 3 years later, that would not be ideal. Secretary, Hong Kong Post delivers public services, and we have to maintain such services. So we need to inject funding to maintain such services over the next 3 years. About 3 years later, we will come up with a proposal on how we will reform Hong Kong Post so that we will continue to provide postal services and at the same time break even. As we study and come up with the proposal, we will consider various possibilities. There are many changes to postal services. Nowadays, we will make reference to the practices in other economies. At the same time, we will factor in the economic situation in Hong Kong as we formulate the proposal. In 2028, we will roll out this proposal. As for the airmail center as well as the decanting building, I will defer to the Postmaster General. Yes. The construction cost is $150 million, as stated in paragraph 5. We applied for a funding of $700 million years ago because we intended to dismantle the airmail center and rebuild it. And the funding we asked for was supposed to cover the transitional arrangement. But the decanting building only cost $150 million. We will keep this decanting building and at the same time refurbish the existing airmail center. Next, Mr. Jonathan Leung. The Liberal Party of course, supports the continuous operation of Hong Kong Post. The original objective is to have Hong Kong Post run on a self-financing basis. Traditional mails have dropped and e-commerce mails have skyrocketed. Hong Kong Post has been integrated into the logistics network in Hong Kong. It has its advantages. This funding is for the operation of Hong Kong Post over the next 3 years. Like the previous member said, this is just to keep Hong Kong Post alive. I think increasing revenue and saving costs should be the main objective of Hong Kong Post. I see that we lack automated facilities. For example, if there is a lack of these facilities, it would affect efficiency and your service quality. I want to know, how will the money be spent on these facilities? Paragraph 19 of this paper says that the government will increase revenue and develop various services. So, will you develop your own IPs? Hong Kong Post has a long history. If you develop your own IPs, you'll be able to make a profit. You can also collaborate with other parties to earn money. Secretary, the current term government has been paying attention to the fiscal position of Hong Kong Post. From 2015 to 2025, we have achieved a cost savings of $1.1 billion. In 2025, we suspended the development project that cost $4 billion. And we've also reduced establishment by about 796 posts. So based on actual demands and circumstances, we have adjusted the operation of Hong Kong Post. As for automated facilities, there are collection points. For example, we have 196 iPostal stations. We have also 120 post offices and 450 convenience stores that provide in total 800 collection points. So we are working towards automation. Hong Kong Post is a government department, so it has to follow a lot of rules. It is not like private commercial operation. Regarding e-commerce businesses, we would see if we have enough competitiveness to make more profit.
I support the government in actively exploring what kind of commercial models they can use so that the Hong Kong Post can operate on a self-financing basis. Thank you. Mr. Lam Wai-kong, I in principle support the proposal. As said in paragraph 12 of the paper, Hong Kong Post has to provide a universal postal service in accordance with the requirements of the Universal Postal Union. But it seems to me that the $4 billion is just for the operations of the Hong Kong Post. It did not say much about developing new sources of revenue. How much of the funding would be used for that purpose? So can you talk about how much of the funding will be used to develop new sources of revenue? I also want to ask about the Airmail Center refurbishment proposal. Originally, it would be $700 million, but there's an under $100 million budgeted. It seems that now it's $500 million. But with the refurbishment proposal, it seems that the cost does not do much. It's just to maintain services. Can you talk about what the expected benefits are regarding the refurbishment proposal specifically? Thank you. Secretary. Thank you, member, for the questions. We do want to develop the e-commerce market further, but we are indeed lagging behind our competitive in terms of cost effectiveness. We are exploring a new model of operation to see how we can improve our competitiveness, but we have to conduct some studies first to reach a conclusion. So we want to allocate $4 billion for sustaining the operations of the Hong Kong Post in the interim. I will let my colleague talk about specific details about the Airmail Center. The Airmail Center was established in 1998, so approximately 30 years ago. A lot of the infrastructure has to be refurbished, say the power supply system and the materials. The mail handling system is also from 30 years ago. A lot of the components cannot be replaced, so we can't only rely on general maintenance for the use of the system. We have to also automate and have smarter facilities for the material handling system. So with the refurbishment proposal, we should be able to enhance our efficiency by upgrading existing outdated systems instead of relying on repairs. We can also work with different postal administrations, especially China Post, to develop business in the Greater Bay Area. And that is also in line with the country's development strategy. Thank you. Chair, I have some more questions. Do they have a specific figure on the expected benefits for the refurbishment proposal, or after they have developed further the e-commerce market? And if they found the $4 billion to be not so useful for the operations of the Hong Kong Post, would they consider allocating the funds to other public services? Thank you. Secretary. Well, we are conducting a study so that we know what to do with the Hong Kong Post in 2028. There are different options, and we are referring to the practices of different jurisdictions. I will let my colleague answer the question about expected benefits. Well, we actually have a figure in paragraph 17. We will have developed e-commerce market further. We expect to have close to $800 million in 2027-2028. After refurbishment, it can reach to $900 odd million. Thank you. Professor William Wong. Thank you, Chair. I support the funding proposal to help Hong Kong Post tide over the difficulty, but against the backdrop of traditional postal demand declining and having fierce competition from other postal services, the administration must make sure they have medium to long-term sustainable solutions for the Hong Kong Post to make sure that we are using public money appropriately. If we look at other places, postal administrations often provide some sort of public services. For example, in the UK, they allow underprivileged groups and elderly persons to collect public assistance money in postal offices. We have different departments in Hong Kong providing different public services. Can we centralize such operations to be done by the Hong Kong Post to develop new sources of revenue? It can also reduce the manpower on other government departments. Second, the demand for e-commerce is booming. The Hong Kong Post does have some self-collection points, but because they close early, it is not convenient for those who are working to collect their packages there. I don't think you need much manpower to maintain relevant services. Would you consider extending the opening hours of post offices to attract more demand for relevant services. But of course, doing that would incur more in administrative and operational costs. Have you considered with this funding proposal you can achieve a break even with this additional funding? Thank you. Secretary, we do want to achieve break even with this fund allocation. We'll explore different solutions, including, say, installing additional service points. We have observed post offices in other economies to provide banking or other business, but that would require amendments in legislation. We do want to get more feedback from LegCo members to see if Hong Kong Post can provide diversified services. I want to also say one thing. The government has been subsidizing postal costs so that the public can pay a very small amount to post stuff. And if you increase postal fees, that would of course be a heavier burden on citizens, but we consider some adjustments are probably due. We will heed members' feedback to devise a solution that is acceptable to parties. Thank you. Mr. Tan Ka-piu, in the past, I have already asked for a review of the model of operation of the trading fund, and we actually had similar feedback for the electrical and mechanical services trading fund. It is hard because the Hong Kong Post faces fierce competition from competitors. The Hong Kong Post has to comply with the relevant international convention and provide universal postal services for citizens at affordable prices. I think to resolve the problem altogether, you should convert the Hong Kong Post back to a government department. Otherwise, you just make those working in Hong Kong Post worry every few years. At one point, the unemployment rate is lower than 3% and the Hong Kong Post wanted to make use of a flexible approach to pay more to staff members working overtime to tide over the manpower shortage, but the Audit Commission did not allow this. I don't understand because they just wanted to adopt a flexible approach. I think having a department that does not have a dominating source of revenue operating as a trading fund is really unfair. Now, on to my observations. We have the postal services having a long history, and it is to comply with the requirements of the Universal Postal Union and a similar union in the Asia Pacific. If we have to meet the requirements with difficulty, I think we should just convert the Hong Kong Post back to a government department. And in fact, we have received feedback that to facilitate collection services, it would incur some administrative costs to have the post office facilities open on Saturday. Why not just extend the opening hours on weekdays and close the post offices on Saturday to save costs? I think there should be good communication between the administration and the Hong Kong Post to make sure we can provide sustainable postal services. I do support the funding proposal, though. I don't think you need a response, right? We can perhaps see if the Secretary would like to give a response. I think the members' points are very much valid. We will explore whether to extend the opening hours of post offices to provide more convenience to citizens in collecting services. Mr. Holden Chow, thank you. We have to consider whether the proposal is simply for the sustenance of operations of a Hong Kong Post. The DAB considers different factors. Hong Kong Post is incurring a loss, but then we do have to provide relevant services to the public, especially for those in the grassroots. We do think there is a need, so we support the proposal to inject funds into the Post Office Trading Fund to sustain the operations of the Hong Kong Post. But we would like to raise some observations for you to do better in future. Now, you have tried to develop new sources of revenue. Say, in the past 3 years, you have $1.5 to $1.7 billion in revenue, but it does not cover the significant administrative costs. The Audit Commission report also talked about this. For example, we can have advertisements placed in different network facilities of the Hong Kong Post, such as on advertising panels. I think that's one way. We had other members suggest that the Hong Kong Post can provide other services on behalf of other government departments and charge citizens for that. I think that's another option. I understand where the Secretary came from. The government has been subsidizing postal fees to provide postal services to the public. I understand where they're coming from, really, but then I think with Hong Kong Post being in a difficult situation, perhaps we can make adjustments to local fees soon to increase revenue. Developing new sources of revenue is very important. If the government can make good use of the postal network, there's much that can be done. We need to maintain basic services, but I think you should go above that, make good use of the postal network, generate more revenue for that. I think you need to have reforms to develop new sources of revenue. Thank you.
Can you reply, Secretary? I thank Mr. Holden Chow for his views. We will consider his suggestions. Next, Mr. Jonathan Lamport. The business sector support the funding proposal. However, we'd like to ask for the following information. According to the paper, the loss in 2024 to 25 is about $18 million. The government is asking for $4.6 billion, and part of it will be spent on the operation of Hong Kong Post over the next 3 years. And the loss projected for 2027 to 28 is about $1.2 billion. I want to know if the deficit aggravates because of the operating environment, or is it that the $4.6 billion that you ask for will be enough to cover the expenditure? Now, to mail a letter, it cost a few dollars. And have you calculated what is the operating cost for posting a mail? I want to know how much taxpayers are actually paying if the emerging markets do not develop as expected. Then in 2030 the situation will be worse. So I want to know the roadmap for Hong Kong Post in the coming 3 years. I'll ask the Postmaster General to reply. Paragraph 17 shows that there will be a drop of 7% every year in terms of traditional mail. We rely on traditional mail for the revenue currently. With e-commerce, we hope that there will be increase of revenue. As for estimated expenditure, we try to compress it by rolling out revenue-generating measures. However, there are costs that must be paid. For example, terminal dues, as well as port dues, they have to be paid. And also, there will be inflation in, for example, fuel costs. And all these fees that we have to pay keep increasing. And every year we see a growth of these fees or expenditure of about 10%. And we want to adopt innovative technologies. That's why there will be depreciation cost as well. As for rental fees as well as management fees, we have tried our best to compress them. However, it will inevitably rise in the coming few years. That's why the estimated deficit stands at about $1.2 to $1.3 billion in the coming 2 years. We are applying for $4.6 billion as to cover the operating expenditure. We also hope to have enough reserve for contingency. For example, if there is fluctuation because of external environment, then we have enough reserve to cover the costs in the coming 3 years. Sorry, Chairman, I'd like to ask about the postage rate of $2.4. Is there room for adjustment? The postage revenue is not enough to cover our expenditure. Every year, we suffer from a deficit. And that's how much we are subsidizing. Dr. Johnny Postal services are required by citizens every day. Many elderly people, they wait in the queue to pay for fees in the postal offices. So I support this funding proposal to sustain the operation of Hong Kong Post. Many members asked what will happen 3 years later. The Secretary shows his commitment. He said the administration will try its best to come up with a strategy. I'd like to ask about paragraph 18 of the paper. It says that the administration will introduce innovative technologies, and that would include self-service postal facilities. I want to know how much these facilities will cost and will there be any KPIs? I want to know with these facilities, will Hong Kong Post be able to break even? Now, $500 million will be spent on the airmail center, and it will help expand the e-commerce businesses. We will see a growth of about $700 to $800 billion in the coming 3 years. And the revenue to be generated is not significant. So I want to know the $500 million, will it be worth it? Postmaster General, iPostal stations and iPostal kiosks are installed in private premises. They are installed by Hong Kong Post, and that does not require rental expenditure. For those installed on private premises, we have to pay a rent. These self-service facilities can provide convenience to citizens, and the usage rate has been good, and we think that it is worth it to make investment in such facilities. That's the situation with self-service facilities. Let me supplement. the material handling system to be built can help enhance efficiency, and it can also help reduce manpower. This will be very crucial to the operation of Hong Kong Post. It is going to be a long-term investment. Next, Mr. Rock Chen. I'm looking at page 8 of the paper. That is the estimated expenditure and estimated deficit. I see that in the coming 3 years, the revenue will drop from $1.5 to $1.3 billion. It is a drop of 14%. Staff costs in the coming 3 years will stay at the same level. I want to know if Hong Kong Post will formulate a manpower improvement framework. Will it freeze the number of headcounts? For example, a postman is retired and you will not hire a new postman. Will there be such a framework? Second, again, I'm looking at the same table. Will you come up with an estimated revenue for example, traditional mail and e-commerce? And for these businesses, will you come up with an estimated expenditure? When we look at the financial statement of an organization, we have to look at the breakdown of the various businesses. Then we can tell which business is more competitive. If we identify a high growth potential business, then we can do more on those areas. I wonder if the administration has such information in hand. Secretary, concerning the manpower framework, we will, based on the manpower situation, make adjustment. Currently, we have been hiring contract staff. We will ensure flexibility. So based on the actual situation, that is, how much work we have to do on traditional mail or e-commerce, reduce manpower. With contract staff, there is a great level of flexibility. Postmaster General, when we conduct e-commerce business, we have to pay for terminal dues as well as port dues. We want to make the best use of our manpower. For example, we hire postmen and other staff, and they can help take care of e-commerce businesses as well as other businesses. So they help with traditional mail as well as e-commerce businesses at the same time. Like the Secretary said, whenever we develop a new business, we make sure that we can meet a certain margin in terms of our profit, and therefore we have to take into consideration the external environment, and we try to compress costs as much as possible. I want to know if you have identified any high growth areas in your businesses. If there is great potential for these businesses, then you can invest more in these areas. Postmaster General? We think that it is competitive if we devote on e-commerce businesses, especially electronic products, so we try to partner with e-commerce platforms. Next, Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you, Chairman. The government is asking for $4.6 billion, and it's a great sum. If we approve this funding proposal, it would give people the impression that we agree that Hong Kong Post could suffer from the estimated deficit. We adopt the model created by the British government many years ago. In this new era, should we continue to adopt this business model? While we have to rethink the model, we shouldn't wait until 3 years later to come up with a proposal. Secretary, you are in charge of commerce and economic development. If we should stop using a business model, then we should suspend it immediately. Secretary keeps saying that we have to develop new business areas. Well, from my point of view, I think what you have been doing cannot compete with what the private sector is doing. This is because the private sector is much more responsive and they act very rapidly. Everything the government does have to go through the Finance Committee as well as the relevant panels. If you wait for another year or another year and a half, you will suffer from greater losses. Hong Kong Post has to maintain basic public services, especially for those living in remote areas. I'd rather you maintain the basic operations. As for other businesses, perhaps you could outsource them to the private sector. Otherwise, you will keep suffering losses. If you keep adopting this model, you'll just see a greater deficit 3 years later, even with a new solution or proposal. The situation 6 months later could be vastly different from the situation now. So my suggestion is that you should not wait until 2028. If you are to stop the current business model, you should do it now. We don't want to give people the impression that by approving this funding proposal, we expect Hong Kong Post to suffer losses. You should tell the public that you need this funding because you need to maintain basic services for the public. I think that's more reasonable. Well, if you look at the LCSD, it's also suffering from losses. However, it has to provide basic recreational services, and those resources have to be allocated to the LCSD. So, Secretary, would you consider suspending the studies and instead of coming up with a solution or proposal in 2028, you should suspend this business model? That way, it would be easier.
Any response from the Secretary? Thank you for the members' comments. We will consider different options. Thank you. Mr. Chan Zhenying. Thank you, Chair. We can't stop the decline in postal demand, but there are some basic services that are required by people that we are not as familiar with. For example, senior citizens can collect cash at the Hong Kong Post without going to banks. I would reluctantly support the relevant proposal because there's a need to maintain the basic services. We had many members talk about how we can develop new sources of revenue. I have 3 questions specifically. 1, would you have the Hong Kong Post hire someone with commercial sense to manage the Hong Kong Post to see how you can develop new sources of revenue and increase revenue? My second question is that for staff costs in the next 3 years, you will see a decline in $6 to $7 million. Is it because the civil servants are retiring, or is it because you have the centralized material handling system which allows you to save manpower, thereby decreasing staff costs? I have a third question. According to the paper, in 2024, your reserves decreased to $3.4 billion, and you are asking for $4.6 billion in funding. But you didn't mention the figures about the reserves figures. You only have how much in injection there will be between 2026 to 2030. So can you talk about specifically the reserves between, say, starting from 2026-27? Thank you. Postmaster General. Thank you, member, for the questions, and thank you, Chair. Whether we can engage someone with commercial experience to manage the Hong Kong Post. Let me say this, we're not trying to be a commercial giant here. We just want to make use of our existing resources to develop some new commercial services. And we engage some of those who have experience in the logistics industry to try to really commercialize our network services. We already allow people to place ads on our facilities, including the 3D advertising postbox project. We do want to make adjustments to our manpower in response to changes in demand. We want to compress manpower costs to mitigate the increase in staff costs. We will make flexible adjustments to manpower. We will perhaps rely on natural wastage to reduce manpower, which is why the staff costs are generally maintained at a similar level in the next 3 years to mitigate the inevitable increase in certain components of staff costs. We do want to make sure we have adequate cash reserves to respond to any unanticipated circumstances. We need to have regard to the revenue and different costs, including staff costs. We do make sure to account for cash flow fluctuations. We do have adequate reserves to respond to unforeseen circumstances. Thank you, Ms. Vivian Kong. Thank you, Chair. We are making an injection from the Capital Investment Fund. Has the government assessed whether the commitment of the fund will affect the fund's operations for other projects? It is also talked about how in the next 3 years there are different projects, for example, the 3D advertising postbox project, to create new sources of revenue. How much will these projects make in contribution to revenue? I think it is very important for the Hong Kong Post to successfully transform. Have you considered for the transformation strategy of the Hong Kong Post the synergy in working with other partners? Thank you. Postmaster General, if this proposal is passed and with the specific motion passed in LegCo, the government has earmarked relevant funds for our operations. As for how we can create synergy with other partners, such as with tourism partners, we can perhaps create sub-IP and related products. We can have themed post offices, for example. We can develop such business, but the revenue is not expected to be significant, which is why in paragraph 17, we only talk about, for say philately and other business, the increase in revenue is just $1 million for every year. But we hope that with this we can boost development of other products and services as well as the greater economy. Thank you. Mr. Adrian Ho, thank you, Chair. I in principle support the funding proposal, but I do think it is a trend that we will see a decline in public postal services. It is not unique to Hong Kong, but I hope the administration would understand it is not easy to reverse the trend in the next 3 years. Now, I have a question for the Secretary and the Postmaster General. According to the estimates submitted by the administration, in the next 3 years, the staff costs every year would amount to over $2.2 billion. It is 90% of the funding injection. I think for any enterprise, this cost structure is not sustainable. We have approximately 7,000 employees with the Hong Kong Post. 5,000 of them are civil servants. 2,000 are contract employees. How long is the contract period for these 2,000 employees? If we are to save costs, we need to consider perhaps doing something with the employee structure. The Postmaster General said the staff costs would be maintained at a similar level in the next 3 years. But with the 2,000 contract employees, can we perhaps consider when we are supposed to renew the contracts, not renew the contracts of the contract employees, because when decreasing the number of staff from 7,000 to 5,000 would mean a significant amount saved. Have you assessed how many staff members are needed to provide basic postal services? Thank you. Secretary, we have 4,246 civil servants. We have civil service contract staff members amounting to 1,028. In total, 5,274. It is already a significant decrease from the peak at 7,000 odd employees. When there are vacancies, we will just hire a non-civil service contract staff member. We can always renew the contract, or we can just let the contract lapse. The contract period is in general a year. We may choose to renew the contract or not. It really depends on the needs of the Hong Kong Post. And when the contract is to lapse, we will see if the vacancy is to be retained. And for civil service vacancies, we will also consider whether to hire a non-civil service contract staff. Indeed, staff costs take up a large proportion of the costs of the Hong Kong Post, so we are monitoring the situation closely. In fact, one of the initiatives we considered is to save costs. Another part of it is about developing new sources of commercial revenue to make up for the deficit in order to achieve break even. Thank you. Dr. Webster, thank you, Chair. Morally, I support the funding proposal because we need to maintain basic services. I actually asked some questions before at the panel meeting. I was dissatisfied with the paper provided then because they were just asking for funding without providing specific information. Now they have some proposals on how long they can spend the money for and what they're spending on. I think the calculations are quite specific. So for the $4.6 billion, we are saving some costs for the refurbishment of Air Mail Center, about $500 odd million. But then I can check with the calculations. Basically, with the $4 billion, you have made use of the costs saved for the refurbishment proposal to be used in the next 3 years, basically. Is it really the case? I also see in the next 3 years, you would see e-commerce revenue increased from 792 to 987 million dollars, but then terminal dues and conveyance costs would also increase by 23%, so that would eat into your revenue. And as other members said, their staff costs do not see a significant decline. So I do not really see any changes with the revenue and expenditure structure. In fact, it's probably worse. I also want to ask about paragraph 20. The Bureau said they would have a comprehensive review of the operational model, but there is no timeline, there are no KPIs, there are no withdrawal conditions for funding on the next occasion. So I want to ask, what will you do for the comprehensive review of the operational model of the Hong Kong Post? Secretary, actually, we do have a timeline. As I said earlier, in 2028, we will announce a solution that is to be discussed with LegCo members on the way forward for the Hong Kong Post. We need to refer to the practices of different economies, so there's much work to do. We do not rule out any potential solutions. We can perhaps share more when we have more details. I will ask the Postmaster General to answer the other questions. Thank you, Chair. For the $4.1 billion proposal, we are saving some for the airmail center proposal originally. Indeed, we are trying to make use of the save costs for our operations in the next 3 years, but there's also a part of it for potentially unforeseen circumstances. Indeed, there's an increase with the terminal dues and conveyance costs, but as I said earlier, we have always been subsidizing postal fees. But we do see an increase in revenue for e-commerce, and we will charge terminal dues and conveyance costs for clients making use of e-commerce services. So we should be able to recover some of the costs with that. As for staff costs, as I said before, we will do more to save costs, to control the staff costs. As the Secretary said earlier, we will flexibly allocate manpower. If necessary, we'll just hire staff members via the non-civil service contract arrangement. But after all, there is going to be an increase in staff costs. So we try to compress the costs so that in the next few years we will have it maintained at a stable level, because with this increase it would just be capital increase. We hope to mitigate such increase. I just have a short follow-up. If the proposal is passed, I hope that annually we can have a report made to the Mahalo. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan Chiu. We have no choice but support this funding proposal of $4.6 billion because Hong Kong Post needs to maintain the public postal services. Like Dr. Webster said, I think the administration can make further improvement. I hope the administration can elaborate on this. I'm looking at the table on page 3. I don't know why we need to project the airmail volume for the coming 20 years. Even if you provide a projection for 2046 to 47, there's no way for us to confirm that projection. So is it necessary to make a projection for airmail volume 20 years later? Also, like Dr. Webster said, there will be growth in e-commerce businesses. from 2027 to 28, there will be a growth of 10.6%, and in the following year, 12.6%. I've talked to the e-commerce sector. With fuel costs as well as the existing economic condition, no one in the industry project a double-digit growth. So how will you be able to achieve such a growth? The secretary said you'll be able to make profit in this area, but 10% of growth every year? It looks like there is a gap between your projection with that of the industry. I'm looking at the table on page 8. The $700 million will be spent on operation. That accounts for 20% of the total expenditure. I think you'll need to give a breakdown. If this accounts for 20%, what will the other spending be? I hope the government will provide more detailed figures if 20% of the costs will come from operation. Also, if you come back 3 years later, I believe you will come up with different proposals. First, you maintain the existing operating model. Second, you adopt a public-private partnership model. Third, outsourcing part of the services to external parties, and for necessary basic services, you may want to keep them to yourselves. I believe that you should be able to provide these 3 options 3 years later. Secretary, on the table on page 3, the costs are for refurbishing the airmail center. It's going to be a long-term project. It's not that we will refurbish the center 3 years later again. So we have come up with an estimated cost to make sure that the AMC will have enough capacity to sustain its operation for the coming 3 to 5 years. It's not that the cost will keep changing every year, but for every large-scale project, we make an estimated cost for the long-term operation. Also, we have heard members' views on the various options. We will come up with a proposal later. Yes, Postmaster General, on the estimated revenue for e-commerce, we believe there will be a 10 to 20% growth. This is because in the past few years, because of external environment, we saw a big decline in our e-commerce businesses. While there are still uncertainties in the external environment, we have stepped up partnership with other parties. Around the world, post offices have been facing the same problem, so we want to expand our businesses. We hope that we will achieve such a growth. This is because there was a great decline in the past few years. And also with the refurbishment of the airmail center, we believe that we will be able to enhance efficiency in our e-commerce businesses. As for other operating costs, what do they cover? They cover rental fees paid to private premises, management fees, utilities, as well as cleaning fees. They also account for part of the operating costs. Maintenance fees account for about 25%. And car rental, about 20%. And the rest of the 20% are central administrative fees. So other operating costs mainly cover rental and maintenance. There will be a rise in costs because we are outsourcing some of the services. We hope to further compress the costs, so in the coming 3 years, we hope to contain the operating costs through cost-saving measures. I'd like to remind members and government officials to be brief. You often take 3 to 6 minutes to ask a question. Next, Mr. Chen Xiu-hong. Thank you, Chairman. I've read all the papers, and I've also looked at the financial statements of the trading fund in the past few years, I see that Hong Kong Post is facing great challenges. The situation is quite pessimistic. Every year it's been suffering losses. How come Hong Kong Post did not conduct a review earlier? Back in October 2025, the government launched the plan to redevelop the airmail center. You should have been able to project it. The situation, given the difficulties as well as the high operating costs. You expect that in the coming 3 years, you will suffer an estimated deficit of $1.3 to $1.5 billion each year. The government cannot keep injecting funds to Hong Kong Post to keep it alive. The secretary said in 2028, the government will come up with a solution. As I said, you should have come up with a solution earlier. I believe the administration has probably come up with a plan. It's just that the plan is perhaps not mature enough to be presented to members. So it looks like we members have no choice but approve this $4.6 billion funding. Secretary, please not wait until 3 years later. Please come back 1 year later, as soon as your plan is mature. We'd like to help the Secretary solve the problem. Should Hong Kong Post outsource some of the services and remove some other businesses? Of course, we want to increase revenue and cut costs. In terms of cutting costs, we see that 65% of the costs are staff costs, and most of these staff are civil servants, so there is little room for you to make adjustment. So will you look at your traditional mail business as well as e-commerce business? You should have done a market analysis and research study. Have you looked at the competitiveness of Hong Kong Post? How much Hong Kong Post has been earning in terms of its profit? How does it compare with private operators? Mr. Chen, please be brief. You have already talked for 3 minutes. You can perhaps deploy your staff to other government departments in order to cut costs. You said $700 million are for operation, and that covers central administrative fees as well as rental and management fees. I know that there is little room for further compression, but can you tell us what kind of cost-saving measures have you put in place? Please elaborate the details. Postmaster General? In terms of cost compression, about 30% of the costs are for rental. We have improved our post office network, and we will continue to do so in the coming 3 years. And we are not increasing the costs in this regard. Secretary, please give us an undertaking. Please do not wait until 2028. Well, the 2028 is going to be the deadline for us, so within or by 2028, we will come up with a solution. It will take time for us to strike a balance. We'll have to take into consideration the interests of all parties before we roll out a proposal. We hope that the proposal will allow us to break even. 2028 is our deadline. It doesn't mean that we will have to wait until 2028. Mr. Lau Ka-keung, Hong Kong Post on one hand have to provide postal services, and on the other hand it's been running on self-financing basis. It's not easy. So I support this proposal. I have the following suggestions. First, on paragraph 11 and in the note, it says that during the construction period, Hong Kong Post will build provisional facilities, and it will cost $130 million, and it accounts for 1/4 of the $500 million of costs. The decanting building is very close to the construction site, and it will not create long-term value. And however, the money cost is higher than the material handling system that will cost $125 million. Has the administration thought about putting in place a phased approach so as to lower the rental fee? Paragraph 4 says that the volume of airmail handled by the airmail center has plummeted from 36,000 tons in 2019-20 to 12,000 tons in 2025-26. And by 2046-47, the airmail volume will drop further. I want to know, based on what the administration made this projection. Also, according to the paper, in 2030-31, that is the first year after the funding injection will be used up. I want to know if you have an estimate on the operating costs as well as expenditure. If by then Hong Kong Post still suffers a loss, what will you do? Postmaster, the first question is about the decantation fees. Will we adopt a phased approach? That would be difficult. This is because we will refurbish the airmail center and we have the decantation project to be carried out at the same time. So when necessary, we will rent a place, and also when necessary, we will need a connection system. We will carefully use taxpayers' money. As for our projection on e-commerce businesses, in 2025-26, the airmail volume stood at about 12,000 tons. This is because of the war and other reasons we saw a drop. And in 2030, the projected volume will be 16,000 tons. This is because in 2029, the AMC will be completed and it will help enhance efficiency. We believe that there will be greater capacity for us to handle the e-commerce businesses. This AMC will mainly for e-commerce businesses. Therefore, we project that the airmail volume will reach 16,000 tons. We have been working with China to provide services in the Greater Bay Area.
All right, next, Mr. Chan Pui Lang. Thank you, Chair. If we look at the ordinance for the Post Office Trading Fund, it says the Postmaster General should have in mind the relevant principles in operation of the trading fund. If one, ensuring efficient and effective allocation, and two, making sure to keep revenue within limits. And thirdly, most importantly, to make sure the fixed assets can derive reasonable returns as determined by the Financial Secretary. But I think in recent years, the Hong Kong Post's operations cannot meet the three goals, especially for returns from the fixed assets. Only in 2015 and 16, I believe they have met the goal. But in the last 15 years, most of the time, they cannot meet the relevant goal. And in the past 5 years, they have seen a significant deviation. I think it shows that the operations of the Hong Kong Post are problematic. What kind of remedies have you implemented to try to change the situation before? According to paragraph 17, it says that in the next 3 years, the trading fund's revenue will decline and there will bound to be a deficit. I think you're already giving up on this. You're not even trying to improve the condition of the Hong Kong Post. You're not saving costs either. It seems that the costs are increasing in the next 3 years. It seems that you're just burning through the money. I think you should review or make adjustments to the revenue and expenditure structure to really show us you are committed to improving the financial position of the Hong Kong Post. And for the review, I think, can we expedite the review? We shouldn't wait for 3 years to see if we can introduce a new model of operation. Secretary, we do have in mind the situation, which is why we have already reduced manpower to reduce staff costs. Between 2021 and 2025, we have saved $1.1 billion in costs. In 2025, we have terminated the project for the airmail center to also save costs. As for developing new sources of revenue, for the provisions of the trading fund, they do not reflect fully the situation because there are many restrictions imposed without flexibility. As we saw a decline in demand for postal services, we turned to e-commerce services where there was great demand, and we also tried to control the biggest component of costs, that is staff costs. We hired contract staff members to lower staff costs. We have tried hard to really make changes, but we need funding after all to provide basic postal services. I hope the member understands that the Hong Kong Post and the Bureau have been working hard to manage the situation. Thank you. Mr. Yang Wing-kit, thank you, Chair. I would support the funding proposal to maintain public postal services, but I do not want you to just burn through the $4 billion. I see that the point made by the Hong Kong Post in the paper is unreasonable. You do see a significant decline in demand for postal services, and we are trying to promote paperless initiatives. But you have not reduced manpower significantly. I think we need to really think about how we're going to deal with the manpower situation. Can there be a cross-departmental deployment mechanism so that we have more staff members of the Hong Kong Post being contract staff members rather than civil servants, so that we can control the financial position better? For example, if I go to a courier company to post something, I only see 1 or 2 staff members, but when I go to a post office, there will be 5 to 6 staff members. Do we really need that many people? I think it also plays into competitiveness. We really need to consider structurally how we can resolve the problems. I also see some problem with efficiency. I spent $168 and it took me 6 days to post that. But if we use the courier that has a name that starts with S, it only takes 4 days, $50 to post that item. It's really hard for you to compete with couriers in basic postal services. There's no way for you to compete with them in terms of e-commerce. So I think you really need to review your structure and perhaps consider collaboration with other bodies, not just the China Post or mainland authorities, so as to enhance competitiveness and generate more in revenue. Thank you. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Yang, for the questions. Mr. Yang indeed raised a very good pain point. We do want to tackle the different pain points. And in 2028 or within 3 years, the $4.6 billion is just a budgeted figure. We will try to save costs. We will make changes in response to service demand. In 2028, we'll devise a solution that will incorporate members' feedback for the future of the Hong Kong Post. Thank you. Mr. Lam Chun Sing, thank you, Chair. Many members have given some very good suggestions for the development or the way forward of the Hong Kong Post. I do not have much in suggestion, but I want to convey some employees' feedback. They are concerned. I believe some employees are actually watching the broadcast today. If the proposal is not passed, what will happen? I don't think you should fund the operations regardless of whether the operations are incurring a loss. But I think with the trading fund, if you are just injecting capital into paying the staff costs, and after 3 years you are going to close the Hong Kong Post, or it will be operated in some sort of model, employees are very concerned. Will they be fired, or will you have some sort of early leave packages? Are they going to become civil servants again? There is some sort of confusion because right now the trading fund is paying for their salaries. We have 5,000 odd staff members right now. So 3 years later, if the situation deteriorates or if the Hong Kong Post is not operated on this model, what will happen to the employees? Secretary, we are considering different options. We need to balance different interests and discuss with other departments to devise a solution. Thank you. Mr. Eric Yim. I, in principle, support the capital injection. I think we all understand there is no choice but to approve this proposal to maintain basic postal services. I believe the Bureau has already pledged to expedite relevant reforms, but they really have to move quickly. Many countries are already promoting the privatization of their post services, such as Germany, the UK, and Japan. For Japan Post in particular, after privatization, the government still is a majority shareholder or stakeholder that has control over the operations of the Japan Post. I want to ask if the administration would consider privatizing the Hong Kong Post and the different options for models of operation of the Hong Kong Post in future. We can relax restrictions by practicing modern enterprise management. We can also have the Hong Kong Post flexibly commence different services. It may or even list on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange for financing, and that should resolve in the long term the issue relating to its financial position. Secretary, we will consider different options. We thank the member for his comments. Thank you. Mr. Alan Chan. Thank you, Chair. I first would like to praise the Secretary's decision to terminate the redevelopment project of the Airmail Center, and for really different kinds of data. it really shows there is no point in redeveloping the airmail sector. And I appreciate they terminated the project right away, and we are just adopting a transitional solution. And within the time frame suggested by the Secretary, we will have a comprehensive review. In fact, postal administrations everywhere have not been doing so well. Say in Europe in 2011, they have different companies. Say we have postal companies that came about that really are profitable, and many other administrations are investing in them. I think we are not doing too well, but the negotiations did not go too well. After all, there were some issues with staff costs, and TNT in the end was sold to the UPS, and they needed the market to bail them out to pay their salaries. I do support the funding proposal, but I think they need to really improve the operations by extending operational hours. I think the utility costs incurred by extending hours is just a minor issue. If they can't deploy the manpower to do that, that is the issue. Thank you. Secretary, thank you, member, for the questions. We will explore the expenditure and cost structure so that the operations are sustainable. Excuse me, Chair, I was saying that the Postmaster General should consider this issue. All right, any response from the Postmaster General or the Secretary? None? Thank you. Professor Priscilla Lang. On 17th of June, I actually raised a written question asking if the Bureau had considered practices in other places such as Germany, Japan, and Singapore to have partnership with private sector companies. And in fact, we can collect packages transported by other couriers at the Hong Kong Post's post offices. So we are doing some sort of partnership. There are different possibilities. We can have the Hong Kong Post become a government department to provide public services, or we can privatize it. There are really two major directions. I want to ask, what will happen after we have spent the $4.6 billion, $500 million being spent on hardware specifically, but for the $4.1 billion, what will we be able to do with the sum? Will we make sure to continue to provide, for example, registered post services, because registered posts are the only option recognized by courts? You are cutting staff, but then you are still not as competitive as private sector companies. What will you do since you're incurring loss?
Secretary, we have said a number of times that we will review holistically the operation model of Hong Kong Post, and that would include privatization and converting Hong Kong Post into a government department. No matter which solution we adopt, we have to make sure that Hong Kong Post can continue to provide public services. We hope that the new operation model will allow us to break even. So we will consider all the suggestions made by members. Chairman, I agree to this direction. According to the Secretary, the review will involve some 5,000 staff. The government may consider adopting a public-private partnership model or privatizing Hong Kong Post. I hope that during the review process, the administration will consider how to redeploy the staff. Secretary, I've heard members' views. We will consider different possibilities. Ms. Christine Fong. Hong Kong Post has been operating on the trading fund, and it has suffered losses for 8 years in a row. And today, the administration is asking for a funding of $4.6 billion in order to maintain basic operation of Hong Kong Post. The Secretary said the administration will conduct a review by 2028. I think we have to think about whether Hong Kong Post should offer only basic services or enhance its competitiveness by providing other services. If we do not approve the $4.6 billion of funding, it will affect basic postal services in Hong Kong as well as staff remuneration. To us members, this is a difficult decision. I hope, therefore, the Secretary will conduct the review as soon as possible. If it will affect basic postal services, this is not just about how much Hong Kong Posts are losing, it's about how much taxpayers are subsidizing these services. I hope the government can tell us the relevant information. For example, for each mail that costs $2.4, how much are we subsidizing? Also, I've been helping the government to promote iPostal stations. I tell people that they can get free services in Tseung Kwan O. To reform, it takes a lot of effort. We are worried that the government will come back to LegCo and ask for funding 3 years later. So you have to think about the positioning of Hong Kong Post. Will it become a government department, or will it adopt a public-private partnership model? Will part of the services be outsourced? I think the Secretary has to think about all these and make a decision. Secretary, we've heard members' views. Our original intent is to come up with a solution as soon as possible so that Hong Kong Post can break even and continue to provide basic services. It will take cross-departmental effort to carry out the study, but we will roll out the proposal as soon as possible. I have a supplementary question. Some courier companies run at a very low cost. For example, they make use of bus depot as well as spaces outside convenience stores for people to pick up their mails. How come the government does not take law enforcement actions against these non-compliant or irregularities? The government should have enjoyed greater advantages. For example, any mail that comes in have to go through the government before they are sent to other places. Can the government come up with such a strategy? Secretary, I think there is a certain framework that we have to stick to in terms of our operation. Competitors, they run on a very different model compared to us, but they have to comply with the rules and regulations. Dr. Hui Simon Lee, I have a suggestion. It is not easy for both LegCo as well as the government on this issue. Hong Kong Post has been running on the trading fund. I see that Hong Kong Post has been trying very hard to develop new businesses. According to the paper, there is little information that allows us to make a very accurate judgment. Now, going back to the question about funding injection, will the funding injection make a great change? Well, I'm not very optimistic about the Korea market. I hope the government can carry out its own study. My view is that post offices have to maintain their basic postal services. For example, courts only recognize registered posts. So I hope the government will explore converting Hong Kong Post into a government department. Secretary, I thank the member for the suggestions. We will look into that. Mr. Peter Xu. There are currently 5,000 civil servants working under Hong Kong Post. How many hours do they work every day? Postmaster General. For frontline postmen, they work 48 hours every week. How about every day? There is flexibility. We look at their working hours every week. They work 5 days a week, and on average, they work, for example, 8 to 9 hours per day. So, in total, they work for 48 hours a week. All right? I believe members will endorse this proposal. This is because we need postal services in Hong Kong. I know Hong Kong Post has been thinking of different ways to break even. Public postal services in a lot of countries are not a lucrative business. Post offices around the world rely on subsidies. So I understand that Hong Kong Post have been working with the private sector. For example, it allows private enterprises to put up ads on post boxes, and also you've been developing courier businesses as well. However, it has not been able to break even. At the panel meeting, I raised a number of suggestions, but the secretary wasn't there, so I'm going to repeat my points. First, on rental fee. There are about 110 sites on which you have to pay a rental fee. For example, you use a site on Linkread and the rental fee could be as high as $100,000. Will you talk to major developers so that they would lower the rent? Also, you could consider making use of government land or government sites. Hong Kong Post has been running on self-financing basis. However, if it runs out of money, it has to ask for funding. So I want to know if the rent could be lowered. Also, there are lots of self-service pickup points. I know that private enterprises rent premises or private sites for these collection points. There are a lot of vacant spaces in public housing estates. You could perhaps talk to the Development Bureau to develop these collection points. If you have 3 to 4 such collection points in each public housing estate, you would definitely outperform the private sector. Thirdly, on manpower. Staff working for Hong Kong Post have been working very hard. They always achieve their targets and they get a lot of awards. So I know that your staff have been very dedicated. I want to know how they can become more competitive. In the private sector, I know that they are paid based on the work they do. So will you revamp your system? I understand it's hard to revamp the civil service system. But for new recruits, perhaps you can adopt a new model. For existing staff, you can allow them to make their own choice in terms of the remuneration package. If you manage to revamp the system, you may be able to outperform the private sector. Secretary, I thank member for the suggestions. We will look into them. Before Ms. Julia Lau speaks, I'd like to remind members that there are 3 members waiting to speak. After Mr. Ron Chan has spoken, I will put this item to vote. Sorry, it's not Mr. Rock Chan. It should be Mr. Kenneth Fogg, who will be the last member to speak. And after he has spoken, I'll put this item to vote. Members, please return to this meeting room. Ms. Julia Lau. I have no option but support this funding proposal. However, I'd like to see if there are ways that we can help the Secretary identify a quick solution. Perhaps you can work with large-scale companies. You can talk to the major staff. You can conduct surveys and understand their needs. And you can generate a report based on the surveys to see what you can do to make improvement. Also, you could do a comparative study. You can compare your practice with that in other countries. How do other countries cope with the situation? Before I read this paper, I browsed the internet and I looked at the practices in Japan. Post offices in Japan, they take care of insurance as well as banking services on top of postal services they provide. This may not be a suitable model for Hong Kong, but if you engage a consultancy firm, I believe it will help you generate a report. Secretary, I thank the member for the suggestion. We have repeatedly said that we will review the situation holistically and we will draw reference from other economies as we conduct the study.
Mr. Andrew Lam, thank you, Chair. From the figures provided in reports between 2022 and 2025, there was a significant decline in revenue. In terms of operating costs, it can be seen that you have been trying to compress the relevant costs from $4.4 billion to approximately $3.36 billion. But then the staff costs are maintained at a similar level of $2 to $2.1 billion. So what happened was staff costs ratio of total operating costs increased from 40-odd% to 60-odd%. I don't see relevant figures in the papers for 2025-2026. So I want to see if the ratio of staff costs to total operational costs has continued to increase. Even if I don't have the figure now, I don't think it would have improved, because in future we have staff costs at $2.2 billion, and with the decrease in construction costs for facilities, you have most of your costs in staff costs. I'm not going to tell the administration how to do business. I hope the government is clear about the trends and make a decision when it is due. Thank you. Secretary, any response? We thank Mr. Lam for his comments. We will consider different options carefully. Mr. Lee Chen-kung, thank you, Chair. Mr. Shu Kao-fai talked about different issues faced by the Hong Kong Post I want to ask, say, for other equipment used by post offices, vehicles, or additional costs for rentals, is it possible we can make use of these assets to place ads or generate revenue of some sort? We do have advertising on post boxes, I note that. I also want to ask, for post offices that are open up to 5:30 p.m. during weekdays and up to 1 p.m. on Saturdays, most workers can't really take advantage of the services of the Hong Kong Post. If we can extend operating hours of post offices to the evening, perhaps we can in turn decrease operational costs and staff costs in some way. Secretary, I heard you answer this question multiple times, but you can perhaps provide a simple response. We will try to develop new sources of revenue, and we will, as much as possible, try to save costs. Thank you. Mr. Kenneth Fogg. Chair, excuse me, I would like to speak for the second round, but I would like to share some of my personal observations. I note in paragraph 19, subparagraph 3, the Hong Kong Post will develop diversified postal services and launch stamps with different themes and work with different sectors. I very much support this. In my experience, many organizations or companies I serve work with the post office to launch stamps for some important occasions or events. There is much room for collaboration. We did not have formal written communication on this. We only got feedback from frontline officers from the Hong Kong Post. It is only with specific anniversaries that they may be able to do it. But I think with the Postmaster General's commitment, we can perhaps try to be more proactive, and we should make sure to communicate that with frontline officers. We can be more proactive in exploring collaboration opportunities. In fact, if we ask frontline officers and if we just get that answer, most people would just lose interest. I think you really want to do more in postal services and try to work with different organizations so that they will help promote your services as well. Secretary, any response? We thank the member for his comments. The Postmaster General will get in touch with the member to see how we can improve relevant services. All right, we had all members speak. And now put to vote SCR 2026-27-24 with those who are in favor, please raise their hands. Those against, please raise their hands. I think most of members who voted were in favor of the proposal. The proposal is endorsed. The next Finance Committee meeting is to be held on 3rd of July. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.